Damon Grayson, at 39 years old, knew the precise sound of a system under immense pressure. As an HVAC technician, he spent his days listening to the groans of overworked compressors and the strained hum of failing fan motors. His annual salary was a respectable $61,000, earned through sweat and a deep, intuitive understanding of mechanics. But on this Tuesday night at 11:17 p.m., the system under pressure was his marriage, and the sound it made was the cold, brittle voice of his wife, Brielle. They were standing in the living room of their modest $280,000 bungalow in Charlotte's Eastland neighborhood. It was a house Damon had poured his soul into, replacing the entire ductwork himself, installing a top-of-the-line Train X V20i unit that cost him $14,000 at wholesale, and ensuring every vent pushed out perfectly conditioned air. But the air in the room was thick with a tension no filter could purify. Brielle stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of frustration. She was wearing a pair of $180 Lululemon leggings and a simple white tee, her at-home attire that still cost more than Damon's entire work uniform. "I don't understand why you're being so stubborn, Damon. Just call her, apologize." "Apologize for what?" Damon's voice was low, tired. He had just finished a 16-hour day, wrestling with a commercial rooftop unit in the summer heat, and his hands, though scrubbed clean, still felt coated in grime. His $89 Timex watch felt heavy on his wrist. "I told Mr. Henderson I could save him money with a different supplier. Your mother overheard and twisted it into me being incompetent. Now Henderson is thinking of pulling a $28,000 maintenance contract." "My mother is just looking out for us," Brielle insisted, her voice rising. "She has connections. She knows people. Maybe you were coming off as cheap, not smart. Did you think of that?" She was trying to protect her reputation, and by extension, ours. Damon stared at her. Her words felt like a physical blow. His reputation for honest work was the foundation of his entire business. Protect her reputation? Brielle, that was my client, my work. And she is my mother. The shout was sharp, echoing in the small room. She is hurt. You embarrassed her in front of one of her oldest friends. She feels you deliberately undermined her. All you have to do is call her, go over to her house in Myers Park, and beg my mother's forgiveness. Is your pride really worth more than our peace? The phrase hung in the air between them. Beg my mother's forgiveness. The humiliation of it coiled in his gut. He thought of Yvette's sprawling $1.8 million colonial home, with its perfectly manicured lawns and the hushed, judgmental silence of its rooms. He pictured himself standing on her Persian rug, head bowed, while she looked down on him with that familiar, dismissive pity. He, the man who fixed things, was being told to break himself for her satisfaction. He had spent years swallowing his pride, absorbing the endless stream of slights and condescensions, all for the sake of peace, for the love of Brielle. But something inside him, a load-bearing component that had been groaning for years, finally fractured. What would you do in that situation, when the person who is supposed to be your partner demands you sacrifice your dignity for someone else's vanity? Sometimes the quietest people have the firmest limits, and Damon was about to find his. He had no idea then, standing in his living room under the weight of that impossible demand, that the key to his liberation was already sitting on a server he himself had configured, just waiting to be discovered. The early years had been a facade of domestic normalcy, each scene painted with the subtle, persistent brush of financial disparity. Damon remembered their third wedding anniversary. He had saved for months, carefully setting aside cash from side jobs, to buy Brielle a $1,200 David Yurman bracelet she'd pointed out in a magazine. He presented it to her over a candlelit dinner he'd cooked himself in their small kitchen. Seared scallops and risotto, a meal he'd practiced twice to get right. Her eyes had lit up when she opened the small ribboned box. "Oh, Damon, it's beautiful," she'd breathed, letting him fasten it around her wrist. He felt a surge of pride, a warmth that had nothing to do with the oven. He had done this. He had provided this moment of luxury. The next evening, they went to Yvette's for dinner. It was a weekly ritual. They'd pull up to the Myers Park Colonial in Damon's 2012 Toyota Camry, a car with 187,000 miles on it that he maintained himself, and park behind Yvette's white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 machine that was replaced every 3 years. Yvette greeted them at the door, her eyes immediately landing on the new bracelet. She was a tall, elegant black woman whose posture seemed to broadcast her wealth. Her skin was luminous, and her hair was always perfectly styled in a silk press that must have cost a fortune to maintain. "Brielle, darling, what's this? It's lovely." She took her daughter's hand, examining the silver and gold craftsmanship. "Damon gave it to me for our anniversary," Brielle said, beaming. Yvette smiled, a tight, polished expression that never quite reached her eyes. "How sweet of him. It reminds me of the little one I picked up for you in Milan last year." She turned and gestured towards a jewelry box on a nearby mahogany credenza, a piece of furniture that likely cost more than Damon's entire living room set. "You should wear them together. A little high-low mix is always so chic." The warmth in Damon's chest went cold. In one sentence, she had demoted his proud, hard-saved-for gift to a little one, a trinket to be paired with something far superior. He glanced at Brielle, hoping to see a flicker of defense, of solidarity. But she was already admiring her mother's collection, the conversation moving on, leaving Damon's gesture to wither in the silence. This was the pattern. Every accomplishment of his was minimized, every purchase overshadowed. When he finally launched his own business, Grayson HVAC, after years of working for a larger company, he was immensely proud. He'd spent his entire $15,000 in savings on a used Ford Transit van and the best equipment he could afford. He designed his own logo, built his own simple website, and pounded the pavement for his first clients. At Sunday dinner, he announced the news. "It's official. Grayson HVAC is open for business." Yvette had offered a tepid congratulations. A week later, she called him. "Damon, a dear friend of mine, Margaret, needs a new system for her guest house. I told her you'd be perfect for the job. It's a chance for you to show what you can do." Damon was thrilled. A referral in Myers Park was gold. He spent 2 days drafting a meticulous proposal, sourcing a high-efficiency Lennox unit for $7,500 and calculating his labor costs to be as competitive as possible. He presented the $11,000 quote to Margaret, who seemed impressed. 2 days later, Yvette called again. "Damon, darling, I'm afraid Margaret went with another company, a more established one." "Don't feel bad. It was probably too big a job for you to start with. You need to build a portfolio with smaller clients first." He later learned through a supplier that Margaret had hired Air Pro Solutions, a rival company owned by a man Yvette played tennis with at her country club. The contract was worth over $15,000. Yvette hadn't just failed to help him. She had actively steered the business to her friend, using Damon as a pawn to seem helpful without ever intending to let him win. When he tried to explain this to Brielle, she'd waved it away. "Mama was just trying to help. You can't get upset every time things don't go your way. This is a tough market." He felt like he was going crazy, living in a world where the facts he saw were constantly being denied and reframed. His reality was being rewritten, sentence by sentence, by his mother-in-law, and his wife was holding the pen. He worked tirelessly, his days a blur of scorching attics and freezing crawl spaces, building his business client by client, his glowing 5-star reviews, a testament to his skill and integrity. Yet in the one place he was supposed to feel most valued, his own home and family, he was treated like a charity case, a fixer of things who could never quite fix his own station in their eyes. The betrayals weren't a single cataclysmic event. They were a slow, steady erosion, like water dripping on stone, accumulating over 4 long years. Each incident on its own could be explained away as a misunderstanding, a social gaffe, an overreaction on his part, but together they formed a suffocating narrative of disrespect that left Damon feeling invisible. It started with the family stories. At a Christmas gathering surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins in Yvette's cavernous living room, she began recounting the story of how Brielle's first car had been fixed just in time for her to drive to her college internship. "I'll never forget it," Yvette said, her voice resonating with theatrical warmth. "The transmission was completely shot. I had to call in a major favor with my mechanic, Jean-Pierre. He worked all weekend on it. Cost me a fortune, but it was worth it to see my baby drive off safely." Damon stood by the fireplace, a glass of eggnog in his hand, and felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered that weekend vividly. He and Brielle had only been dating for a year. It was his weekend. He had spent 2 full days in his father's garage covered in grease, with his dad guiding him as they pulled the transmission from that old Honda Accord. He'd sourced a rebuilt one for $800, saving them thousands, and installed it himself. It was one of the first truly significant things he had ever done for her, an act of pure service and love. And Yvette had just erased it, replacing his sweat and effort with a fictional French mechanic and a wad of her own cash. He looked over at Brielle, who was smiling and nodding along with the story, not even registering the lie. When he tried to gently correct the record later that night, she'd said, "Oh, Damon, don't be so sensitive. Mama's memory is getting a little fuzzy. It's not a big deal." Then came the professional sabotage, disguised as help. Yvette was a prominent figure in Charlotte's black business community, a real estate investor with a vast network. She would often mention Damon's HVAC business at her social functions. "My son-in-law, Damon, has a wonderful little company," she'd say, but the introductions she made were always a prelude to a redirected opportunity. There was the incident with the community center. A local church, where Yvette served on the board, needed a complete overhaul of its aging HVAC system, a project worth at least $80,000. Damon spent a week putting together a comprehensive below-market bid, a gesture of goodwill to the community. He presented it to the board. Yvette praised it publicly. "Damon has put so much thought into this. It's a very generous offer." The board awarded the contract to AirPro Solutions, the same company that had gotten the job for Yvette's friend. The winning bid was $5,000 higher than Damon's. The board chairman later took Damon aside. "Your mother-in-law was your biggest advocate," he said kindly, "but she expressed some concern that a one-man operation might not be able to handle a project of this scale and timeline. She wanted to protect you from getting in over your head." Damon felt a cold fury. She hadn't advocated for him. She had used faint praise to damn him, planting a seed of doubt that killed the deal. She had weaponized her concern, making her sabotage look like love. When he confronted Brielle, she defended her mother vehemently. "She was worried about you, Damon. That's a huge project. What if something went wrong? It would have ruined your reputation and embarrassed her." The most cutting moment, the one that replayed in his mind in the dead of night, happened at Yvette's annual garden party. It was a major social event in Myers Park. Damon always felt out of place. His $250 suit from Men's Warehouse, a stark contrast to the $8,700 Armani and Brioni suits worn by the other men. He was standing near a group of Yvette's friends when she walked up, a glass of champagne in her hand. One of the men, a surgeon named Dr. Phillips, asked Damon what he did. Before Damon could answer, Yvette laughed, a light, airy sound that was pure performance. "Oh, this is my Damon," she said, placing a hand on his arm that felt more like a brand than an embrace. "He fixes things. Air conditioners mostly." She then leaned in conspiratorially to her friends, her voice dropping to a loud whisper he was clearly meant to hear. "He fixes air, but Lord knows he can't fix his own marriage." The group chuckled politely. Dr. Phillips gave him a pitying look. The humiliation was absolute, a public stripping of his dignity. He was reduced to a caricature, the simple handyman, the bumbling husband, a source of light amusement for his powerful mother-in-law. He walked away without a word, found Brielle, and told her they were leaving. In the car, she was furious, at him. "You are so dramatic, Damon. It was a joke. You have to learn to laugh at yourself. You made us look ridiculous by storming out of there." He didn't storm out. He had walked calmly, deliberately, away from the source of his pain. But in Brielle's eyes, his self-respect was drama. His pain was an inconvenience. He realized then that he wasn't just fighting Yvette. He was fighting the years of psychological conditioning she had imposed on her own daughter. Brielle's reality, her sense of normalcy, had been sculpted by Yvette's casual cruelty. To defend him would be to admit that her entire world was built on a foundation of malice. And that was a truth she was not prepared to face. From that day on, a profound and lonely silence grew in their little bungalow in Eastland, a silence that no amount of perfectly conditioned air could ever make comfortable. The discovery happened on a sweltering Thursday night in August. It was 9:14 p.m. Damon was in his home office, a small, cluttered room that smelled of sawdust and sold air. He was supposed to be preparing invoices, but his heart wasn't in it. He'd lost another big contract that day, a multi-unit apartment complex in South End worth an estimated $45,000 a year in maintenance. The property manager, a man he'd had a great relationship with, had called to deliver the news. "Sorry, Damon. The owner decided to go with AirPro, said they were a preferred vendor for his investment group." Damon knew with a sickening certainty who was in that investment group. Feeling defeated, he found himself procrastinating by cleaning up old files on his computer. He navigated to the shared family cloud drive he had set up years ago. It was supposed to be for sharing photos, tax documents, and memories. He had even convinced Yvette to use it, setting up her new smart home system to automatically back up its data there. She loved her new gadgets, a network of Google Nest hubs, and smart speakers he had installed for her as a birthday gift. "Just say, 'Hey Google,' start a recording, and it will save it for you, Yvette," he had explained. "It's great for leaving yourself reminders." He had no idea how right he was. He was clicking through folders, deleting old vacation pictures, when he saw a directory he didn't recognize. Yvette_audio_archive. His curiosity piqued. He clicked on it. Inside was a list of hundreds of audio files. The file names were simple timestamps: 2023-08-15_14-32-05.mp3, 2023-08-12-10-10-40.mp3. Most were short, just a few seconds long, likely accidental triggers of the recording feature, but some were much longer. One file, dated 2 weeks prior, was over 15 minutes long. He felt a strange premonition, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He put on his $150 Sony headphones, wanting to seal himself off from the rest of the house, and clicked play. The audio was crystal clear. He could hear the faint clinking of a teaspoon against a ceramic mug. And then, Yvette's voice, smooth as silk and laced with venom. "No, Richard, you don't understand," she was saying. The name hit Damon like a punch. Richard Powell was the owner of AirPro Solutions. It's not just about steering the South End complex to you, it's about creating a consistent narrative. Damon is limited. He's a good boy, he tries hard, but he doesn't have the polish, the scale. Every time I position you as the premium, reliable choice, and him as the nice but risky alternative, we both win. You get the contract, and I maintain the integrity of my network. Damon's breath caught in his throat. He leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped his desk. Richard's voice came through deep and conspiratorial. And Brielle is okay with all this? Yvette let out that same light, airy laugh from the garden party. Brielle sees what I need her to see. She understands that her life, her comfort, is tied to my success and my connections. She knows Damon's little $60,000 a year business isn't going to keep her in the style to which she is accustomed. In her mind, I'm helping him by keeping him from failing on a stage that's too big for him. The file continued. They discussed specific clients, people Damon had spent months cultivating, the Myers Park Homeowners Association, a $120,000 contract pipeline he'd been close to securing, a new boutique hotel downtown, $70,000. Yvette detailed, with chilling precision, how she had systematically dismantled his reputation with each one, planting seeds of doubt, leveraging her influence, and always having Richard and AirPro ready to step in and collect the spoils. It was a 4-year conspiracy, laid bare in 15 minutes of audio. He wasn't just losing business to a competitor, he was being actively, maliciously undermined by his own family. The total value of the contracts they discussed was staggering, easily over $340,000. He clicked on another file, a shorter one from the previous winter. It was Yvette on the phone with her sister. And then Damon had the audacity to try and correct me about Brielle's old car at Christmas. In front of everyone, I had to put him back in his place. He needs to remember that he married up. He's a guest in this life, and he'd do well not to forget it. He felt nothing. The rage, the hurt, the confusion. It all collapsed into a single point of cold, hard clarity. The pressure in his own system had reached its limit, and instead of exploding, it had condensed into something solid, something unbreakable. He looked at the screen, at the list of files, each one a digital testament to the lies he had been living. He had been a fool, trying to fix a relationship that was designed to be broken, trying to earn the respect of people who profited from his failure. He minimized the window. He stood up, walked into the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water. His hands were perfectly steady. The technician in him took over. He had identified the problem. He had found the source of the malfunction. Now all he had to do was plan the repair. The days that followed were a masterclass in strategic restraint. Damon moved through his life with a quiet, unnerving calm. A man feigning normalcy while a revolution churned inside him. The world looked the same, but he saw it through entirely different eyes. Every word from Brielle, every call from Yvette, was no longer just an interaction. It was data. On Friday morning, Brielle came into the kitchen while he was making coffee. She seemed to have forgotten her ultimatum from Tuesday night, or at least chosen to ignore it. "Morning, honey," she said, her tone bright and breezy. "Mama wants to have us over for Sunday dinner. She's making her famous braised short ribs." The old Damon would have bristled, would have seen the invitation as another command performance. The new Damon saw it as an opportunity, a stage. "Sounds good," he said, his voice even. "What time?" Brielle looked relieved, a small smile playing on her lips. 6 o'clock. "Oh, and she mentioned she's having the Hendersons over, too. She wants to smooth things over for you about that contract. See? I told you she was looking out for you." Damon simply nodded, taking a sip of his black coffee. The Hendersons. The very people Yvette had used as a recent catalyst for his humiliation. It was perfect. Yvette wasn't just setting a table for dinner, she was building the theater for her own downfall. He had no idea what was coming. Later that day, he had to go to Yvette's house for what she called a tech emergency. The smart speaker in her kitchen wasn't responding. As he drove his Ford Transit van through the manicured streets of Myers Park, he felt a strange sense of detachment. He was an actor walking onto a familiar set, but now he knew the true script. He arrived and found Yvette in her gleaming, all-white kitchen, a room that cost more than his down payment. She was wearing a $600 Tory Burch caftan and looked annoyed. "Damon, thank you for coming. This ridiculous thing you installed has a mind of its own." He walked over to the Google Nest Hub on the counter. "What's it doing?" "It's not doing anything. I keep asking it to play my gospel playlist, and it just sits there, silent. For what I paid for this system?" Damon had installed the entire $8,000 system for free, a gift. He pressed a few buttons, ran a quick diagnostic, and rebooted the device. Within a minute, the sounds of Kirk Franklin filled the kitchen. "Just needed a reset," he said. "Well," Yvette sniffed, "it shouldn't need a reset. Things should just work." She then turned to him, her expression shifting to one of magnanimous counsel. "Damon, about the Hendersons. I've spoken with Charles. I believe I've salvaged the situation for you. But you must understand, presentation is everything. You can't go in with these lowball offers. It makes you look desperate. It makes me look bad for recommending you." He stood there, listening to her weave her web of lies, her voice dripping with condescension, and he felt an almost out-of-body calm. He looked her right in the eye. "I understand. Thank you, Yvette. I appreciate you looking out for me." The lie was so smooth, so convincing, it even surprised him. Yvette beamed, pleased with his deference. She had made a critical mistake. She thought his silence was submission. She had no idea it was observation. As he packed up his small toolkit, his eyes scanned the room, noting the placement of the 3 smart speakers in the open-plan kitchen and dining area. He noted their connectivity, their volume limits. He was no longer just the HVAC guy. He was a strategist, and this house was his battlefield. The hardest part was feigning affection with Brielle. That night, she curled up next to him on the sofa, putting her head on his shoulder as they watched a show. "I'm glad you and Mom are okay now," she murmured. "It's so much better when we're all getting along." He put his arm around her, the gesture purely mechanical. He felt the warmth of her body, smelled the familiar scent of her shampoo, and felt a profound, aching grief for the marriage he thought he had. It was already dead. He was just waiting for the official time of death to be called. He was gathering evidence, not just from the cloud, but from their every interaction, compiling a case in the quiet, methodical courthouse of his own mind. He was playing dumb, and he was playing for keeps. On Saturday morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, Damon walked into the uptown Charlotte offices of Thornton & Associates, a law firm known for its aggressive business litigation. He had made the appointment the day before, using a burner email address from the public library. He wasn't taking any chances. He was met by Avery Thornton, a sharp, impeccably dressed black woman in her late 40s. Her office was on the 34th floor, with a panoramic view of the city that seemed to stretch on forever. The fee for her time was a staggering $650 per hour, a sum that made Damon's stomach clench, but he knew he couldn't afford to be cheap. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice crisp and professional as she shook his hand, "please have a seat. Your email was intriguing. You believe you have evidence of tortious interference with your business contracts?" Damon sat in a plush leather chair that probably cost more than his sofa. He pulled a slim laptop from his worn Carhartt backpack. "I do," he said, "and I believe it's irrefutable." He spent the next 20 minutes explaining the situation, his voice calm and measured as he laid out the 4-year history of sabotage. He detailed the lost contracts, the specific names: Margaret, the community church, the South End complex, and the dollar amounts associated with each. He explained his relationship with his mother-in-law, Yvette, and her connection to Richard Powell of AirPro Solutions. Avery listened intently, her face unreadable. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen scratching softly in the quiet room. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair. "It's a compelling narrative, Mr. Grayson, but a narrative is not evidence. In cases like this, it often comes down to a 'he said, she said' scenario, which is very difficult to win." "I understand," Damon said. "That's why I brought this." He turned the laptop around and clicked on the audio file from that Thursday night. He had isolated the 15-minute conversation between Yvette and Richard Powell. He placed a small portable speaker on the desk between them. He pressed play. As Yvette's voice filled the silent office, detailing her methodical plan to dismantle his business and enrich her friend, Avery Thornton's expression slowly changed. Her professional mask dissolved, replaced by a look of focused intensity. She leaned forward, listening to every word. When the recording finished, the silence in the room was electric. Avery was quiet for a long moment. She finally looked up at Damon, a new respect in her eyes. "Mr. Grayson," she said slowly, "this is not a narrative. This is a confession. It is admissible. It is damning. And it is, without a doubt, one of the cleanest pieces of evidence I have ever encountered." She picked up her pen. "Let's talk strategy. First, we send a cease and desist letter to both Yvette and Richard Powell. We draft a civil complaint outlining claims for tortious interference, defamation, and conspiracy. We will calculate your lost earnings, which, based on your initial estimate of $340,000 plus punitive damages, we could be looking at a settlement well over $500,000. Damon shook his head. "I don't want to sue them yet." Avery raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry?" "A lawsuit is public," Damon explained. "It's messy. It gives them time to spin the story, to paint me as disgruntled, to play the victim. I want to handle this differently. I want to reclaim my business first. The money is secondary to the principle." "What are you proposing?" she asked, intrigued. "Tomorrow night I'm having dinner at my mother-in-law's house. The Hendersons will be there. One of the clients she tried to poison against me. I installed her home audio system. It's all connected." Avery's eyes widened slightly as she understood. "You intend to play this recording for them?" "I do," Damon said. "That is a high-risk, high-reward strategy, Mr. Grayson. It could explode in your face." "I'm aware," Damon said, his voice firm. "But it's a closed room. It's her voice, in her house, in front of her friends. There's no denial. There's no spin. There's only the truth. After that, once the foundation is shattered, then we can talk about lawsuits." Avery studied him for a long moment. She then smiled, a thin, sharp smile of a predator who recognizes a fellow hunter. "All right, Mr. Grayson. I like it. It's clean. It's surgical. Let's plan the fallout. Once you've deployed the device, so to speak, my office will be ready. At 9 a.m. on Monday, letters will go out to every client you mentioned. The letters will inform them that you have irrefutable evidence of a coordinated campaign of business interference by AirPro Solutions, and that you are prepared to offer them a significant discount to switch their maintenance contracts to Grayson HVAC to avoid being subpoenaed in the upcoming litigation." Damon felt a surge of adrenaline, This was it. This was the plan. It was more than just getting even. It was a complete systematic dismantling of the machine that had been working to destroy him. He was taking control of the narrative, using their own tools against them. He left Avery Thornton's office an hour later, the $650 charge on his credit card feeling like the best investment he had ever made. He was no longer just a victim. He was a strategist on the verge of a coordinated strike. Sunday evening arrived with the heavy, expectant air of a coming storm. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the immaculate lawns of Myers Park as Damon pulled his 2012 Toyota Camry up to Yvette's colonial mansion. He was wearing his best suit, the $250 one from Men's Warehouse, but tonight it felt less like a costume and more like armor. Brielle sat beside him, humming along to the radio, oblivious. She was wearing a new $2,400 Burberry dress, a gift from her mother, just because. The house was already filled with the low hum of conversation and the scent of roasting meat. Yvette greeted them at the door, a vision of gracious hospitality in a flowing silk gown that likely cost more than Damon's monthly mortgage payment. Charles and Eleanor Henderson were already there, standing by the fireplace, sipping wine. "Damon, there you are?" Yvette said, her voice bright and welcoming. She kissed his cheek, a gesture so false it felt like ice against his skin. "Charles, Eleanor, you know my son-in-law Damon." Charles Henderson, a portly man with a kind face, shook Damon's hand firmly. "Good to see you, son. Yvette was just telling us what a fine young man you are. We may have gotten off on the wrong foot." Damon smiled politely. "It's a pleasure to see you both." They sat down for dinner in the formal dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a long mahogany table set with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses. The conversation was light, curated, and controlled by Yvette. She talked about her recent charity auction, a new gallery opening, a friend's political campaign. Damon remained mostly silent, a quiet observer at the edge of the frame. He ate his short ribs, which were delicious, and nursed a single glass of water. Brielle, seated next to him, kept shooting him encouraging looks, silently urging him to participate, to perform. He simply offered a small, reassuring nod each time, his mind elsewhere, counting down the minutes. The moment came after dessert. Yvette, holding a glass of expensive dessert wine, turned the conversation back to business, as he knew she would. "Charles," she began, her tone one of grave sincerity, "I do hope you'll reconsider Damon for your maintenance needs. I know he's still building his little business, and he can be a bit unpolished in his approach, but his heart is in the right place. He just needs guidance, a chance from established men like you." It was the perfect setup. The faint praise, the subtle dig, the positioning of herself as his generous patron. Charles Henderson looked at Damon with paternalistic sympathy. "Well, Yvette, with a recommendation like that?" Damon placed his fork and knife neatly on his plate. He took a slow, deliberate sip of water. The room was quiet. Everyone was looking at him, expecting a humble, grateful response. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his phone. "Thank you, Yvette," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence. "Your support means everything. In fact, I was so moved by your dedication to helping my career, I wanted to share a little something with all of you." He tapped his phone screen. He had already connected to the house's Sonos sound system, the very one he had so carefully installed. He selected the file, 2023-08-15_14-32-05.mp3. He pressed play. For a split second, there was only silence. And then, Yvette's voice. Not the warm, gracious voice of the hostess, but the cold, calculating voice of the conspirator. filled her own dining room. It came from the ceiling speakers, from the smart hub on the sideboard, from every corner of the room, creating an immersive experience of her own treachery. No, Richard, you don't understand. It's not just about steering the South End complex to you. It's about creating a consistent narrative. Damon is limited. Yvette's face went white. The wine glass trembled in her hand. Brielle's smile froze, confusion clouding her features. The Hendersons looked from the speakers to Yvette, their expressions shifting from polite interest to stunned disbelief. The recording continued, relentless and crystal clear. He's a good boy. He tries hard, but he doesn't have the polish, the scale. Brielle shot Damon a look of pure panic, mouthing the words, "Turn it off." He met her gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He would not. Brielle sees what I need her to see. She understands that her life, her comfort, is tied to my success. At that, Brielle made a small, wounded sound, like a gasp. Her eyes filled with tears as the ultimate betrayal, her mother's casual dismissal of her own autonomy, echoed around her. The recording played on, detailing the plot to steal the Myers Park HOA contract, the boutique hotel, every lie, every stolen opportunity. When Richard Powell's voice asked, "And Brielle is okay with all this?" Yvette's recorded laughter, light and cruel, seemed to suck all the air from the room. When the 15-minute recording finally ended, the silence that fell was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than any sound. Charles and Eleanor Henderson were staring at Yvette, their faces masks of cold disgust. Yvette finally broke, her composure shattering. She slammed her glass on the table, wine sloshing onto the white tablecloth like blood. "How dare you!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. She wasn't looking at Damon. She was looking at her daughter. "You let him do this in my own home." Brielle was openly weeping now, her hands covering her face. "I didn't know, Mama. I didn't know." The Hendersons stood up abruptly. "Yvette," Charles said, his voice dripping with contempt, "we'll see ourselves out. Eleanor, get your coat." They walked out of the room without another word. Yvette turned her fury on Damon. You snake, you planted this. You bugged my house." Damon remained seated. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You recorded it yourself," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of finality. "On the system I installed for you. You just forgot where the files were saved?" Yvette stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The truth of his statement, the sheer idiotic irony of her being undone by her own vanity and carelessness, was too much. She let out a guttural scream of rage and stormed out of the dining room, grabbing her car keys from a bowl by the door. Brielle looked at Damon, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "Damon, please," she begged, her voice a desperate whisper. "Do something. Fix this." He looked at the woman he had loved, the woman who had stood by and watched as her mother slowly dismantled his life, his spirit. He looked at the chaos her mother's poison had finally wrought. He stood up, walked to the dining room entrance, and watched as Yvette's BMW screeched out of the driveway. He then turned back to his broken wife. He looked her directly in the eye and said the three words that would define the rest of their lives. "I fixed it." He then turned and walked towards the front door. He heard a click behind him. Brielle, in a final, shuddering act of severance, had locked the door behind her mother, sealing her out of their lives for good. But it was too late for them. Damon didn't stop walking. The consequences cascaded with the brutal, impersonal efficiency of a factory assembly line. The first domino fell at 9:01 a.m. the next morning. Avery Thornton's letters, sent by courier, arrived at the offices of the half-dozen clients Yvette and Richard Powell had conspired to steal. The language was precise and devastating, mentioning irrefutable audio evidence of a multi-year scheme of tortious interference and commercial defamation. By noon, Damon's phone began to ring. The first call was from Charles Henderson. "Damon," he said, his voice grim, "I am appalled and deeply sorry. Consider our $28,000 maintenance contract yours, effective immediately, and I'll be speaking to the board of the Myers Park HOA this afternoon. I imagine they'll be very interested in hearing what I have to say." By the end of the day, Damon had secured not only the Henderson contract, but also a formal invitation to rebid on the HOA pipeline, a deal worth over $120,000. The boutique hotel owner called personally to apologize and offer him the $70,000 installation and service agreement. Within a week, Grayson HVAC had a pipeline of new business totaling over $250,000, with more pending. Avery Thornton's legal threat, combined with the power of outraged gossip in a tight-knit community, had worked faster and more effectively than any lawsuit. The second cascade was the implosion of AirPro Solutions. Richard Powell, facing both a potential lawsuit and the complete collapse of his reputation, went into damage control. But it was too late. Word spread like fire. Clients, fearing being associated with him or subpoenaed, began canceling their contracts. Within a month, he had lost nearly 40% of his business. He was forced to lay off half of his technicians. His company, once the premium, reliable choice, was now radioactive. The third cascade was social. Yvette became a pariah. Her friends stopped returning her calls. She was asked to step down from 2 prominent charity boards. Her invitations to the galas and fundraisers that formed the bedrock of her social life simply stopped coming. The woman who lived by her connections died by them. The magnificent house in Myers Park became a prison, its silence a constant reminder of the life she had torched with her own words. The final and most personal cascade was Brielle. She sent Damon a barrage of text messages, a real-time record of her emotional collapse. Monday, 10:15 a.m. "You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this. You humiliated my mother." Monday, 4:30 p.m. "The Hendersons called Mama. Everyone is calling. You've ruined her." Tuesday, 9 a.m. "Damon, please come home." "I don't know what to do." Wednesday, 11:20 p.m. "I listened to it again. The whole thing. I can't believe she said that about me." Friday, 2 p.m. "I told her not to call me anymore. I can't. I'm so sorry, Damon. I was so blind. Please, can we fix this? I love you." Damon read each message, but he did not reply. He had already filed for divorce. Avery Thornton handled it all. Because of the clear evidence of conspiracy and the potential for a larger civil suit, the divorce was quiet and swift. Brielle, without Yvette's financial or social backing, agreed to a simple settlement. She kept the bungalow in Eastland, but with it, the full weight of its mortgage, a burden she had never truly had to consider. Damon walked away with his business, his savings, and his dignity. The price of her blindness was the life he had built for them. 2 years later, the Charlotte skyline looked different to Damon. He wasn't just looking at it from the ground anymore. He was looking at it from the rooftops of the city's most prestigious buildings, his new domain. Grayson HVAC was no longer a little business. It was a thriving enterprise, with a staff of 12 technicians and a fleet of 8 brand new Ford Transit vans. Emblazoned on the side of each van, in clean, bold letters, was his name, Grayson. He had won back every contract Yvette had stolen and dozens more. His reputation for honesty and meticulous work had become his brand. His annual revenue had surpassed $2 million, and his personal income was something he never could have imagined in his old life. He lived in a sleek new condo in South End, a glass tower with views that stretched all the way to the horizon. It was minimalist and clean, filled with things he had chosen and paid for himself. A sturdy oak dining table, a comfortable leather sofa, and a state-of-the-art sound system that he mostly used to listen to old jazz records. The emotional distance of the glass tower was a welcome change from the cramped, compromised spaces of his past. He spent his weekends not at tense family dinners but volunteering at a community garden in a West Charlotte neighborhood, teaching teenagers basic mechanical skills and helping them build a hydroponic system for the greenhouse. The rich, dark soil felt more real and valuable under his fingernails than any of Yvette's polished mahogany. This was growth. This was real. He rarely heard about Yvette or Brielle. He knew through the grapevine that Yvette had sold the Myers Park house and moved to a smaller condo in a neighboring state seeking anonymity. Brielle had struggled to keep the bungalow and had eventually sold it, moving into a small apartment and taking a job as an administrative assistant. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was leaving his office when he saw a familiar figure standing on the sidewalk. It was Brielle. She looked smaller than he remembered, her expensive clothes replaced by a simple dress from a department store. She looked hesitant, but determined. She saw him and gave a small, nervous smile. "Hi, Damon." "Brielle," he said, his voice neutral but not unkind. "Your vans are everywhere," she said, gesturing vaguely down the street. I'm really happy for you. You deserve it." "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. "I've been going to therapy," she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying to understand a lot of things. About me. About her. About why I couldn't see what was right in front of me." She looked him in the eye, and for the first time in years, he felt he was seeing the real her, not the curated version. "I know it's too late. I know I can't undo anything, but I am truly, deeply sorry for the pain I caused you, for the pain I allowed." Damon listened, and he felt not anger, but a quiet, bittersweet peace. He had already forgiven her long ago. He had to, not for her comfort, but for his own freedom. Forgiveness was the final step in his own repair process. "I appreciate that, Brielle," he said, and he meant it. "I wish you the best." He gave her a final nod and walked toward his truck, the sun glinting off the bold letters of his name. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true wealth isn't measured in the price of a dress or the size of a house. It's measured in integrity. It's the solid, unshakable value of a name you've built yourself, a reputation you've earned through honest work, and the quiet dignity of a man who knows how to fix what is broken, starting with his own life. What do you think is the most important thing to fix when a relationship breaks down? Is it the other person, the situation, or yourself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And please subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories about finding strength in the face of betrayal.